It was just past dawn in London, when the air around Buckingham Palace felt heavier than usual. The crisp October breeze that usually danced through the royal gardens seemed still, burdened with something unspoken. Inside the ancient walls of Britain's most famous residence, tension crept through the corridors, like fog seeping under the door, silent, invisible, suffocating. For weeks, whispers had circulated through the royal circle about King Charles's declining health. At first, they were dismissed, the usual chatter of palace insiders and paparazzi vultures. But something shifted when Queen Camilla herself stepped forward, pale and visibly shaken, and delivered an announcement that would shake the monarchy to its very foundation. In 3 minutes, the entire mood of the nation changed. The BBC's phone lines lit up. The press room at Clarence House went dark. The palace guards, trained for discipline and silence, could no longer hide the worry in their faces. Because everyone, from the most senior aide to the junior footman polishing the silver, had already heard the same dreadful phrase echo down the marble halls. "It's serious. His Majesty may not have long." For years, King Charles had been a symbol of endurance, the man who waited longer than any heir in British history to ascend the throne. Through decades of scandal, heartbreak, and relentless scrutiny, he'd stood like an oak tree in a storm, scarred but unbroken. But even the strongest oaks, they say, eventually fall. According to one insider who had served the royal household for decades, the situation had taken a grim turn behind closed doors. A secret medical team had been stationed within the palace for several nights in a row, avoiding the media's watchful gaze. Limousines with tinted windows came and went under heavy guard, bringing doctors whose faces were covered under caps and coats. Experts not from London, but flown in quietly from Switzerland. That alone spoke volumes. Camilla's face told the rest. The Queen had appeared before the press unexpectedly, her voice low, her hands trembling as she held her notes. There was no grandeur, no rehearsed smile, no ceremonial tone. She didn't wear her usual jewels or brooch. Instead, she looked like a woman carrying a burden too heavy for even the crown to balance. And although her statement was brief, lasting just under 3 minutes, it was enough to spark one of the most dramatic royal crises in modern memory. The hidden battle. Behind the announcement lay months of concealed struggle. Charles's health, once described by aides as stable, had reportedly worsened rapidly following a private retreat at Sandringham earlier in the month. There were unconfirmed murmurs of collapsing during a private meeting, of fainting spells during state duties, and of doctors warning Camilla that the king's schedule had become unsustainable. Royal sources quietly revealed that since late September, Camilla had been operating as the palace's silent pillar, managing royal duties, meeting with advisors, and keeping a steady hand as her husband's condition fluctuated. Yet those close to her said she hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night. What made this moment so frightening was not just the king's illness, but how quickly it had escalated. For a monarch whose life was defined by control, of image, of emotion, of duty, the sudden unraveling of that control behind the palace gates marked a seismic shift. For the first time since his coronation, the king was no longer in command of his destiny. It was Camilla who had to take the reins. And the decision she made to go public, however cautiously, was, according to those who know her, not one she took lightly. There was debate within the palace. Some argued that silence was the safest option, that the monarchy's dignity depended on privacy. Others, especially those close to Prince William, believed the public deserved honesty, even if the truth was devastating. In the end, Camilla sided with transparency. Her announcement, though brief, was deliberate. It was not a resignation, nor a proclamation of death, but a message between the lines, a message that something irreversible had begun, the 3 minutes that stopped Britain. When the Queen stood before the cameras, few realized that those 3 minutes had been rehearsed and rewritten more than 20 times. Advisors debated every word. "His Majesty is under medical supervision" sounded too soft. "The king's condition is grave" sounded too harsh. Eventually, the final version struck a balance, enough to inform, not enough to incite panic. But panic came anyway. By the time the palace's official social media accounts released the statement, tens of millions of Britons had already seen the headlines. Deadly announcement from the palace trended within minutes. Hospitals across the UK reported people calling in, asking if it was true. News anchors went off script. Even Parliament held a moment of silence before resuming session. No one knew exactly what had happened. Had the king suffered another cardiac episode? Was this related to earlier reports of a health scare, or, as some speculative tabloids hinted, was the king's condition connected to a secret diagnosis hidden for months? Camilla's announcement didn't answer those questions. It wasn't meant to. It was meant to prepare the nation. Inside the palace walls, those who witnessed the atmosphere inside the palace described it as eerily quiet. The halls that once echoed with staff chatter were now hushed. Curtains were drawn, press briefings were canceled. Only senior royals and key medical personnel were allowed near the private wing. It was said that the Queen personally asked for the chapel to remain open throughout the night, candles flickering beside portraits of ancestors whose reigns had shaped the empire. Even Prince William, often the image of composure, looked visibly shaken as he arrived at Clarence House earlier that day. Sources claimed that the meeting lasted nearly 4 hours, long enough for decisions about succession planning to quietly surface, though nothing official was said. And through all of it, Camilla remained at the center. Some insiders described her as steel under silk, fragile in appearance but unflinching in crisis. After decades of surviving public hate, media betrayal, and her own share of royal scandal, she had become the unspoken stabilizer of the modern monarchy. But this, even for her, was too heavy to bear alone. She had been there when Charles's condition worsened. She had seen the panic in his doctors' faces. She had heard words no wife, let alone a queen, ever wishes to hear. And so, when she made the announcement, it was not just a royal duty. It was an act of love, and perhaps of warning. Britain holds its breath. In pubs, offices, and living rooms across the country, the question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Is this the beginning of the end? Britain had endured many royal health scares before, from Queen Elizabeth's final days to Prince Philip's long battles with frailty. But this felt different. Charles was the future the monarchy had waited for. His reign, though short so far, had symbolized a transition from tradition to modernity, from silence to reflection. Now, all of that was in jeopardy. As the day unfolded, palace reporters camped outside the gates, hoping for even a glimpse of movement behind the curtains. The royal flag atop Buckingham Palace was observed, still flying high, not yet lowered, a sign that the king was alive but gravely unwell. Meanwhile, calls between Balmoral, Clarence House, and Windsor grew frequent and tense. Preparations were reportedly made for potential Operation Menai Bridge, the code name for royal protocol in the event of the king's passing, though officials refused to comment. The insider's note. As the insider who watched this unfold, I can tell you this much: nothing within the royal walls happens by accident. Every move, every statement, every photograph is calculated. So when Camilla appeared unannounced, and when that statement came out without prior press coordination, it meant one thing: urgency. Something had happened overnight. Medical briefings, normally signed by the king's private secretary, were now being handled directly by Camilla and William. The queen consort had quietly canceled 2 upcoming engagements, citing personal reasons. Staff were instructed to stand by for updates. Those closest to the couple described the queen as resolute but devastated. It wasn't just fear for her husband, it was fear for what comes next, because she knew what the world didn't yet know, that the king's final chapter might have already begun. A nation in wait. By evening, the media blackout deepened. Major broadcasters were told to prepare special coverage in the event of significant royal developments. Church bells rang quietly in certain towns, a traditional gesture of solidarity during moments of national concern. Outside the palace gates, hundreds of citizens gathered with candles and flowers, not in mourning, but in silent prayer. Some wept openly. Others simply stood, staring at the palace windows as if hoping to see the king wave one last time. And still, no one spoke. Not William, not Harry, not any royal official. Only Queen Camilla's 3-minute statement remained, brief, haunting, and heavy with meaning. As midnight approached, the palace lights dimmed. The king was reportedly still under close observation, surrounded by medical staff. The queen refused to leave his side. An aide later revealed that she had insisted on staying through the night, the same way Elizabeth once sat beside Philip during his final hospital stay. In those silent hours, Britain seemed to hold its breath. The headlines screamed speculation, social media erupted in conspiracy, but inside Buckingham Palace, only one truth mattered: the fragility of time. And as the insider watching history unfold, I can say this: there was fear in the air, yes, but also something deeper: acceptance. a quiet acknowledgement that a reign born from patience might soon end in silence. When morning comes, the world will either see the king wave from his window, or it won't. And if it doesn't, then Queen Camilla's deadly announcement will mark the moment Britain began preparing to say goodbye. The clock had just struck midnight when the whisper spread through Buckingham Palace. The doctors are staying. That one phrase sent a chill through every servant, guard, and aide within the royal compound. Normally, medical teams arrived, conducted brief assessments, and quietly left. But this time, they stayed. Their coats hung on the golden racks near the private wing. Their bags remained unzipped, and their faces, pale and drawn, told a story they weren't yet allowed to speak. King Charles III, once the steadfast heartbeat of a monarchy reborn after his mother's passing, now lay in a chamber that no sound dared disturb. Outside, the London night was unnervingly still. Rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops tapping against the palace's ancient windows as if time itself was counting down. The palace guards stood motionless, their eyes darting occasionally toward the upper floors where the king's suite was illuminated by only a faint amber glow. And somewhere beyond those thick stone walls, Queen Camilla sat alone, not as the queen consort of Great Britain, but as a woman facing the possibility of loss. She had delivered her announcement with dignity, but behind closed doors, her resolve had begun to crumble. Those who saw her that night said she looked smaller, shoulders slightly hunched, her voice barely above a whisper. One aide recalled her words trembling through the air. "If he wakes, tell him I'm right here." But as the minutes turned into hours, it began to weigh heavier than when. The silent corridors. At 2:15 a.m., a low hum of conversation emerged in the East Corridor. Whispers between the royal physicians and the king's personal valet. A chart passed from one trembling hand to another. An oxygen monitor beeped in uneven rhythm. The doctors spoke in cautious tones. Neurological response, cardiac strain, fluid retention. Terms that meant little to anyone outside the room, but everything to those inside it. Meanwhile, royal advisors had gathered in the green drawing room. Papers were spread across the grand table, draft statements, sealed letters to Commonwealth leaders, and confidential documents marked Operation Menai Bridge, immediate activation Draft 1. But even then, no one dared say it aloud. Is the king dying? The Lord Chamberlain refused to leave. He paced near the fireplace, his eyes fixed on the embers. Across from him sat the Archbishop of Canterbury, silently praying. A few doors away, Queen Camilla remained in the private suite, holding the king's wedding band between her fingers, the same ring he had worn since their 2005 marriage. To her, the crown meant nothing now. Only the man behind it mattered. The phone call. At precisely 3:47 a.m., a secure call was made from the palace's private communications center to Kensington Palace. Prince William answered. He had been awake for hours, pacing the floor with his wife, Catherine. Though the couple had endured public life with grace, nothing could prepare them for this moment. The moment when the crown, quite literally, began to shift toward them. The voice on the other end was calm but heavy. "Your Royal Highness, the doctors recommend you come at once." Within 20 minutes, an unmarked black Range Rover pulled out of Kensington. Inside sat William, pale and silent.